Hey, everybody. This is try 3, so hopefully third time's the charm. We're having a pretty intense solar storm that we didn't need right now, and I want to update you on solar weather, the outlook for storms in the Caribbean and the Atlantic, as well as a few other details. These solar storms make emergency responding really difficult because it interferes with communications. And for some reason, TikTok isn't wanting to save my audio or not let me do videos, blah, blah, blah. So if you get any images in this, it will be a miracle. Okay, first off, and pardon any construction noise or sirens in the background, I can't control Denver. You see the rain there up above the Yucatan Peninsula. That's not even a named storm at this point. Keep focusing, if you're a grid worker, on dispersing that storm potential and also cooling the ocean. Go join the Patreon if you want more information about that. Now, in the meantime, you may be hearing about Hurricane Kirk, which I want to assure everybody it doesn't matter how big it gets because it's out in the middle of the Atlantic. It's bypassing the Bahamas and it's not going to impact anyone. It is honestly the ideal path for these hurricanes to be taking. So if you're in the Gulf region, I would be prepared for the potential for maybe some flash flooding, especially if you're already recovering from Helene, and do your best to be prepared just in case you are cut off from services again. There's a ton of stuff on the Patreon about what you can have at various price points to be prepared in these situations. The eclipse is happening in about 15 minutes, but probably nobody's going to see it except for just 175,000 people. so, so it's a very unusual eclipse path. Here are 24 hours of flares. You can see that most of them are coming from a sunspot region 3842, which unfortunately is directly facing us and will be for at least 4 or 5 more days. That's where the X7 came from yesterday. So you can see just in the last couple of days, we've had 8 major flares, and by major I mean M or greater. We had an M7 in the number 1 spot there, and then the X flare was that 4th one, which is an X7, very interesting if you're into numerology. And then we're continuing to have large M flares. So this is putting a lot of CME out there and plasma. And what's going to happen is that CME won't probably strike us until about the 5th, which will create the geomagnetic storms. There's that region facing us. Thankfully, the other large sunspots around it don't seem to be too prolific at the moment. So let's just keep our fingers crossed they do not join the party right now. Now, that bright region up top is an eruption that has been building for about a day and a half. It is turning away from us, but I just wanted to point that out because it could be another large X flare. Just we won't get the full X-ray flux because it is turning away from us. So it can still put out a lot of coronal mass ejection. You can see how bright and intense that X7 was yesterday. And part of what happens when we get flares in the M zone or larger is that they put out a radio blast. They affect the radio flux, which is the amount of noise that is in our atmosphere that interferes with radio communications. When I first started following solar weather, the SFU number, that peak flux down below, that was generally below 100, and there wasn't any interference at all 4 years ago. And now, on average, it's about 250. So there is constant interference. And then when we have these large flares, you can see it peaks up to 800, which produces a lot of noise in the atmosphere and makes it harder for radio communications and GPS to function, which is what our emergency responders are depending on. So fingers crossed when I finish this, it saves and the sound is still there and it has recorded and it uploads and downloads and does all the things, because I don't think I have a fourth one in me. But I wanted to do this to ease any fears anyone might be having in the hurricane zone, especially in the Gulf and in the mountains. And I wanted to give a heads up that if you are along that Gulf Coast, do your best to prepare uh, for any potential flash flooding that could happen, especially if you're in a zone that has already had flooding. This solar storm, uh, it's kind of starting to feel like this is going to be the peak of the maximum. I'll have a better feel for that over the next couple days. Um, you can go to my Patreon for all kinds of information. It's free. There's a lot in there about disaster preparedness, how you can be self sufficient in the aftermath of something if you have to wait for help. And I want to remind everybody the waiting for help oftentimes has to do with terrain and safety and ability to get to places. When all the roads have been washed out, I mean, they literally are having to use mule trains in some places to get things up the mountain. So um, try to focus your tough feelings on proactive preparedness instead of anger that does nothing. I love you all. It's going to be okay. But in my Patreon, I'm talking about how this is not a one-off. This is not going to be the last event like this. It's already been happening around the world. This is the first time we just got majorly hit with one. And it doesn't matter how great your country is, how great your government is, where you are on the planet. Nobody is immune to these climate events, unfortunately. So the best thing we can do for ourselves is be as prepared as possible to be self-sufficient for up to 2 weeks. I know that doesn't do a lot of people any good now, but hopefully we learn from this experience and we do prepare.